Have you ever felt completely drained after spending time with certain people? Do you find yourself absorbing everyone else's emotions until you can't tell where they end and you begin? If you're nodding your head right now, Carl Jung had something crucial to say to you, something that could completely transform how you navigate the world as an empath. Carl Gustav Jung, the pioneering Swiss psychiatrist who gave us concepts like the collective unconscious and psychological types, spent decades studying the human psyche. In his later works, he identified a disturbing pattern that affects empaths more than any other personality type. He discovered that certain individuals, what he called psychic vampires, specifically target empaths because they possess something these energy drainers desperately need: authentic emotional light. Jung observed that empaths, particularly empathic women, carry what he termed anima luminosa, the luminous soul. This isn't just poetic language. Jung believed empaths literally radiate a healing energy that others can sense on an unconscious level. But here's where his warning becomes critical. Not everyone who seeks your light has good intentions. Through his clinical practice, Jung noticed that empaths repeatedly found themselves in relationships with individuals who seemed to need constant emotional support, validation, and energy. These weren't coincidences, they were targeted selections. Jung realized that certain personality types are drawn to empaths like moths to a flame, but instead of simply being attracted to the light, they consume it. The Swiss psychologist identified specific behavioral patterns among these energy feeders. They would often present themselves as wounded souls in need of healing, creating elaborate narratives of victimhood that would trigger the empath's natural desire to help and nurture. Jung called this the wounded healer trap, where the empath becomes so focused on healing others that they forget to protect their own psychological boundaries. But Jung's most chilling observation was this: these psychic vampires don't just take your energy randomly. They have an almost supernatural ability to identify empaths and deliberately seek them out. They recognize empaths by their compassionate responses, their tendency to give benefit of the doubt, and their willingness to sacrifice their own needs for others. If this resonates with you, make sure to subscribe to our channel, because we're about to dive deep into Jung's specific warnings and, more importantly, his strategies for protection. Don't let anyone continue feeding on your precious light without your conscious awareness. Jung's research revealed that empaths who don't learn to recognize these patterns often find themselves in a cycle of emotional depletion that can last for years, even decades. The empath gives and gives, feeling noble in their sacrifice, while the energy vampire takes and takes, never truly healing or growing from the exchange. Jung saw this as one of the most destructive psychological dynamics in human relationships. Jung's understanding of empathic vulnerability went far deeper than simple emotional sensitivity. He identified what he called the shadow projection phenomenon, a psychological mechanism that makes empaths particularly susceptible to manipulation. When someone approaches an empath with their problems, the empath unconsciously projects their own capacity for healing and growth onto that person, assuming they share the same genuine desire for transformation. This projection creates what Jung termed the healing illusion. The empath believes that by giving enough love, understanding, and energy, they can help the other person heal and become whole. But Jung discovered something troubling. True psychic vampires have no intention of healing. They've learned that maintaining their wounded state keeps the energy supply flowing from empathic individuals. Jung documented specific tactics these energy drainers use to keep empaths hooked. First, there's intermittent reinforcement. They occasionally show small improvements or express gratitude, just enough to keep the empath believing that their efforts are working. This creates what Jung called the rescuer's addiction. The empath becomes psychologically dependent on the role of being needed and feeling useful. Second, Jung observed the crisis escalation pattern. Just when the empath tries to set boundaries or pull back, the energy vampire manufactures a new crisis or emergency. They intuitively know that empaths cannot ignore genuine distress, so they weaponize the empath's compassion against them. Jung noted that these crises often occur with suspicious timing, right when the empath is beginning to prioritize their own needs. The third tactic Jung identified was emotional hostage-taking. The energy vampire makes the empath feel responsible for their emotional state, their life circumstances, even their will to live. Phrases like, "You're the only one who understands me," or "I don't know what I'd do without you," become psychological chains that bind the empath to the relationship. Jung was particularly concerned about how this dynamic affects empathic women. He observed that societal conditioning often amplifies women's natural empathic abilities while simultaneously teaching them that their worth comes from serving others. This creates what he called the double vulnerability. Empathic women are both naturally inclined to help and culturally programmed to prioritize others' needs above their own. In his private notes, Jung wrote about a patient he called the luminous woman, an empath who had spent 20 years of her life completely drained by a series of relationships with energy vampires. She came to him feeling spiritually empty, questioning her own sanity, unable to understand why she kept attracting the same type of people. Jung's work with her led to some of his most important insights about empathic protection. The case of the luminous woman revealed Jung's most disturbing discovery about empathic exploitation. This patient had unknowingly become what Jung termed a psychological feeding ground, not just for one energy vampire, but for an entire network of them. Jung observed that once an empath becomes known as someone who gives freely without boundaries, they attract what he called the vampire constellation, multiple energy drainers who seem to coordinate their attacks on the empath's resources. Jung noticed that these energy vampires often worked in patterns that seemed almost orchestrated. When one would step back, another would emerge with a crisis. When the empath tried to take time for self-care, multiple vampires would simultaneously need attention. Jung began to suspect that on an unconscious level, these individuals could sense when an empath was becoming depleted and would time their approaches accordingly. But Jung's most chilling observation was about what he called empathic residue. He discovered that empaths don't just lose energy during these interactions. They actually absorb and carry the unprocessed trauma, negative emotions, and psychological shadows of the energy vampires. The empath becomes a walking repository for other people's darkness, while their own light gradually dims. Jung documented how this residue accumulates over time. The empath begins experiencing emotions that aren't their own, having nightmares about situations they've never lived through, and feeling inexplicably heavy or depressed without understanding why. Jung realized that empaths were literally becoming psychological containers for other people's unhealed wounds. This led Jung to one of his most controversial theories, that certain individuals are born with damaged or incomplete psychological structures that make them unable to process their own emotional energy. Instead of developing healthy coping mechanisms, they become parasitic, requiring constant input from psychologically intact individuals, namely, empaths. Jung called these individuals the psychologically incomplete. He theorized that they represent a shadow aspect of human evolution, people who appear fully developed on the surface but lack the internal mechanisms necessary for emotional self-sufficiency. They've learned to survive by mimicking empathy and emotional depth, while actually feeding off those who possess these qualities genuinely. The Swiss psychiatrist observed that these incomplete individuals are often highly intelligent and charismatic. They've developed sophisticated social skills specifically designed to identify and ensnare empaths. They know exactly what to say to trigger an empath's compassion, how to present themselves as wounded but worthy of salvation, and how to make the empath feel special and needed. Jung's notes reveal his growing alarm at how prevalent this dynamic had become in modern society. He worried that as human connections became more superficial and transactional, empaths would become increasingly vulnerable to exploitation by these psychologically incomplete individuals who had learned to weaponize human compassion. Jung's final warning to empaths came in the form of what he called the recognition protocol, a systematic approach to identifying energy vampires before they could establish their psychological hooks. Jung believed that empaths' greatest weakness was also their greatest potential strength, their ability to sense energy and emotional undercurrents that others miss. The first sign Jung identified was what he termed the empathy test reversal. When you meet someone new, pay attention to how they respond when you share something vulnerable or difficult from your own life. A genuine person will offer support, ask thoughtful questions, or share their own related experience. An energy vampire will either quickly redirect the conversation back to themselves, minimize your experience, or use your vulnerability as ammunition for future manipulation. Jung observed that energy vampires have a peculiar relationship with gratitude. They may say, "Thank you," but they never truly feel grateful because they believe they're entitled to your energy and support. Jung called this the gratitude void. No matter how much you give, they always seem to need more, and they treat your generosity as their due rather than as a gift. Another crucial warning sign Jung identified was the boundary violation test. Energy vampires will consistently push against your boundaries in small ways, showing up uninvited, calling at inappropriate hours, demanding immediate responses to non-urgent matters, or guilt-tripping you when you say no. Jung realized these aren't accidental behaviors. They're systematic tests to see how much they can get away with. Jung was particularly concerned about what he called the trauma bonding acceleration. Energy vampires often share deeply personal, traumatic information very early in relationships, not because they trust you, but because they've learned that empaths feel obligated to reciprocate vulnerability and become emotionally invested in helping. Jung warned that healthy individuals reveal their depths gradually. Those who dump their entire life story on you immediately are often setting a trap. Perhaps Jung's most important insight was about the energy signature of these interactions. After spending time with a genuine person, even discussing heavy topics, you should feel some sense of mutual exchange, perhaps drained, but also enriched by the connection. After interacting with an energy vampire, you feel hollow, confused, or inexplicably depleted. Jung taught his empathic patients to track their energy levels before and after social interactions as a diagnostic tool. Jung also warned about the savior complex trigger. Energy vampires instinctively know that empaths are drawn to rescue narratives. They present themselves as victims of circumstances, other people or systems, never taking responsibility for their role in their problems. Jung noted that while genuine people might struggle with certain issues, they also demonstrate agency and growth over time. Jung's protective strategies for empaths went beyond simple boundary setting. He developed what he called the luminous shield technique, a psychological framework that allows empaths to maintain their compassionate nature while protecting their vital energy reserves. Jung believed that empaths shouldn't have to become cold or closed off to protect themselves. Instead, they needed to learn conscious energy management. The first component of Jung's shield technique was selective permeability. Just as a cell membrane allows beneficial nutrients in while keeping toxins out, Jung taught empaths to develop psychological membranes that could distinguish between genuine need and manipulative demand. This required what he called intuitive discernment, learning to trust the subtle energy signals that empaths naturally receive but often ignore in favor of surface-level social cues. Jung emphasized the importance of what he termed energy accounting. He encouraged empaths to track their emotional investments like financial investments, noting who consistently draws energy without contributing anything meaningful in return. Jung observed that healthy relationships involve natural reciprocity over time, even if the exchange isn't always equal in every interaction. One of Jung's most powerful protective concepts was the authentic self-anchor. He noticed that energy vampires could only drain empaths who had lost touch with their own authentic identity. When empaths are firmly grounded in their own values, needs, and emotional reality, they become much harder to manipulate. Jung developed exercises to help empaths regularly reconnect with their core self, independent of others' needs and expectations. Jung also introduced the compassion-wisdom integration principle. He observed that many empaths operate from pure compassion without wisdom, making them vulnerable to exploitation. True empathic strength, Jung argued, combines compassion with discernment, the ability to see clearly who can be helped and who is simply feeding. Jung taught that sometimes the most compassionate thing you can do is refuse to enable someone's parasitic behavior. The Swiss psychiatrist was particularly emphatic about what he called the healing responsibility reversal. Jung insisted that empaths must understand they are not responsible for healing others. Each person must do their own psychological work. When empaths take on this responsibility, they rob the other person of the opportunity for authentic growth while depleting themselves in the process. Jung's approach included practical daily habits for empathic protection. He recommended energy cleansing rituals, regular solitude for processing absorbed emotions, and what he called empathic meditation, consciously releasing any emotions or energies that don't belong to you. If you're finding these insights valuable and want to learn Jung's complete protection protocol, make sure to subscribe to our channel for our upcoming deep dive videos on empathic self-defense. Jung's final and most profound insight about empaths came near the end of his career when he realized that empaths aren't just randomly distributed throughout the population. They serve a crucial evolutionary purpose. Jung theorized that empaths are humanity's emotional immune system, capable of processing and transforming collective psychological toxins that would otherwise poison entire communities. This understanding led to Jung's ultimate warning. When empaths are weakened or depleted by energy vampires, it doesn't just harm the individual empath. It damages humanity's collective ability to heal and evolve. Jung saw the systematic exploitation of empaths as a threat to human psychological development itself. Jung believed that empaths who learn to protect themselves don't become less compassionate. They become more powerful healers. When an empath maintains their energy reserves and operates from a place of strength rather than depletion, they can offer genuine help to those who are truly seeking growth and transformation. Jung called this empowered empathy, compassion guided by wisdom and protected by healthy boundaries. The psychiatrist's research revealed that empaths who successfully implement his protection protocols often discover something remarkable. The energy vampires in their lives either transform their behavior or naturally drift away. Jung explained that energy vampires can only maintain their parasitic patterns with compliant victims. When empaths stop providing unlimited access to their energy, the vampires are forced to either develop their own coping mechanisms or seek easier targets elsewhere. Jung's legacy includes a powerful message of hope for empaths who have been repeatedly drained and exploited. He insisted that empaths are not doomed to be victims. They simply need to reclaim their power and learn to use their gifts consciously rather than unconsciously. Jung believed that a world filled with empowered empaths would be a world where genuine healing and authentic connection could flourish. In his final writings on this topic, Jung emphasized that empaths must understand their true value and stop underestimating their importance in the world. Your light isn't just beautiful, it's necessary. Your compassion isn't just nice, it's vital to human survival and growth. But this precious gift must be protected, nurtured, and shared wisely. Jung's warning wasn't meant to make empaths fearful or paranoid, but to awaken them to their own power. When you understand how valuable your energy is, you naturally become more selective about how you share it. When you recognize the tactics of those who would exploit your compassion, you can maintain your loving nature while protecting yourself from harm. The choice is yours. Continue allowing your light to be consumed by those who give nothing back, or step into Jung's vision of the empowered empath who heals the world through conscious, boundaried love.